Harpies. Yeah, I said it. That monster name that either gets a collective sigh from your players or a desperate plea for you to please just pick something else from the monster manual for once. And you know the drill. It's a blur of feathers, a few claw attacks, and that luring song that, let's be honest, usually just yanks the heavily armored fighter about 10 feet out of position before everyone else rolls initiative and swat the bird's brains out of the sky like some really noisy, aggressive pigeons. And it's fine, it's an encounter. But is it memorable? Does it stick with them? What if I told you that your next Harpy encounter could be the one that your players talk about for weeks? The one that they hate you for in that, special D&D way, which means that you, the dungeon master, have actually done your job of challenging them in such a way that they find it really enjoyable. Today, we're not just kicking around ideas for meaner monsters, we're getting our talons dirty. We're crafting a full multi-stage Harpy lair. And our example is the treacherous, windswept stoop bridge cliff. This isn't just some cave with a few angry birds. We're going to talk about how to create a layered story, how to make a deadly environmental surprise, a tricky social encounter, and a betrayal so sharp it'll leave your players completely stunned. This isn't about being a killer DM. It's about making your Harpy encounter truly unforgettable. Hello adventurers, and welcome back to the Red Quills. This week on the Really Quick Map series, we're going to be creating a Harpy lair. So get out your graph paper and your pencils. I'm going to grab this out, and we are going to start by sketching out a few caves in the Stoop Bridge cliffs. So first of all, why are we spending all this creative juice on Harpies? They're a classic, yeah, but they often get stuck as just sort of flying pests. But I think that that's a really good reason that we should be using them for this series. Harpies are a great example of a creature that is often misused because you only look at the stat block and think about what it can do in combat. But Harpies, just like any other monster in the monster manual, will choose its lair with great care. It will think about how its abilities can be used both in and out of combat, and it will think about how the terrain, the tactics, the strategies, and the out-of-combat attrition that it can take against the players will be used to great effect. We've already done this for other low-level monsters like kobolds and goblins, but for the Harpies, who have their own lore, their own abilities, their own skills and talents and capabilities, it's going to be the make or break that's going to turn an encounter with a few bird brains into something that's actually clever and useful for you, the DM. So to pull this off, we need to dig into what makes Harpies more than just winged beasts. Harpy lore is our gold mine for building something that's truly nasty, because these creatures aren't dumb. They're described as cunning, opportunistic predators. And the luring song, it's not just a charm, it's a sophisticated psychological weapon. It's meant to draw prey into ambushes or environmental traps. Their lairs are a direct reflection of this predatory smarts that's deliberately picked in remote, hard-to-reach spots like cliffside caves, towering sea stacks, or forgotten ruins on the edge of nowhere. The nests are often grimly decorated with bones and trinkets of their victims, mixed with filth and refuse. It's a pretty clear statement of their cruel nature. And here's the kicker. Harpies aren't looking for a long, drawn-out, fair fight. They would rather ambush, harass, use hit-and-run tactics, and bail if things go south. And it's not about cowardice, it's just smart survival. So we're going to use every bit of this lore to make the Stoop Bridge Cliffs a little bit of legend and a place for player nightmares. Every memorable adventure, every descent into darkness that your players will talk about for ages starts with a hook that grabs them and doesn't let go. So the Stoop Bridge Cliffs, as menacing as it is, needs a solid reason for your adventurers to brave the jagged peaks and the horrors hiding there. Why would they willingly walk into the turf of creatures known for their deadly songs and their vicious appetites? And earlier on the Red Quills, in my most recent Atlas video, I talked about creating adventure prompts. Some small snippets of world building that you can put into your Atlas and your world building that don't outline the step-by-step for a quest, but does give you, the DM, something that you can return to later on that gives you enough world building that you don't have to constantly be propping things up with work after every single session. I used the Stoop Bridge Cliffs in that example as something that we could return to. The idea being that the local Duke of Veerhurst has used a magical artifact to enslave the Harpies into bringing ships onto the cliffs. It's a win-win scenario for the Harpies when you think about it. They get to eat the sailors that are crashed upon the cliffside, and the Duke of Veerhurst manages to get rid of his political and mercantile enemies. It's fantastic. And that gives you the opportunity to pull the players in. Maybe they've met one of the local captains who's sick of this. Maybe they've heard of rumors that only ships flying the Duke's banner are, exempt from the Harpies song. Maybe they hear stories from old fishermen. The hook itself is less important than the adventure, than the quest, than the scenario of injustice that really pulls onto the players. Because that's the thing. The Harpies are interested in a good meal and they like shiny things, as any feathered creature does. But the number of shipwrecks against the cliffs means that all of the cargo from all of those ships is just waiting to be claimed. So let's say that the players have taken the bait. They're driven by, duty or greed, or maybe just a healthy dose of heroic curiosity, and they've arrived at the ominous Stoop Bridge cliffs. They're fairly isolated to the north of the kingdom. The wind howls around them, carrying the faint, distant echo of something that might be music, or perhaps it's just the cry of gulls. And this is where we're going to start building the encounter, not just as a single room, but as a series of linked experiences, each designed to ratchet up the tension and show them more about the cunning creatures that they're up against. So the pebbled beach is the first real taste of the Harpies' turf. If you've done your job right, the players will arrive at the cliffs not knowing quite what is wrong, not knowing who they're up against, nor the abilities of the creatures that they're facing. They've only heard about the shipwrecks. They've only heard that ships have crashed themselves onto the rock. Perhaps they might have heard that the banners of Duke Veerhurst's ships are the only ones that can pass safely by the cliffs. So they come to investigate, and they arrive on the narrow, windswept stretch of shingle and dark sand at the very bottom of the towering, unforgiving cliffs. And this isn't mainly a combat spot. Think of it more like a crime scene investigation, one with a very real, very urgent deadline. Let's set the scene. The air is thick with the damp chill of sea spray. The only sounds are the relentless crash of the waves, and if they listen closely, that faint, almost unnoticeable melody carried on the salty wind, seeming to call from above. Scattered across the beach are the grim calling cards of the cliff's residents, and this is where you shower them with environmental clues. Maybe they find a tattered sailor's cap almost buried in the wet sand, or a splintered oar bleached white. Perhaps a child's waterlogged doll lies half hidden in the seaweed, a truly heart-wrenching find. And drag marks, faint but there, lead from the waterline towards the sheer parts of the cliff, suggesting that victims weren't just drowned, but were actively taken. And of course, feathers. Not clean white gold feathers, but large, greasy, blackish-brown ones, unsettlingly coarse, almost leathery. Half-buried bones, some picked clean with unnatural precision, offer a stark warning. These aren't just random bits, they are deliberate clues for your players, because the first challenge is for them to investigate quickly enough that they know what is going to come get them without the Harpies having spotted them first. So if they can investigate the beach early on, they can gather enough clues to know that they are Harpies, and they know that the Harpies will have chosen a nest high up on the cliffs. And that makes them very, very dangerous. Because the Harpies, if they've seen them, are not attacking quite yet. They're waiting to see what will happen. The Harpies have the height advantage. They can move easily through the air, and they have the ability to lure people in. If you're making this a more difficult quest, you could just increase the DC of the luring song. And I gave some examples in the Atlas video about how you could make this a little bit more difficult of a quest using magical artifacts or stat blocks. And that's fine too. But the Harpies have the advantage here. They're going to wait and see what happens. Because from the beach, the investigation the players have probably leads them to the source of the latest rumors, the mangled remains of the sea serpent, or whatever ship you pick for your hook. It's not a neat wreck. It's impaled on the jagged black rocks just offshore, a testament to the sea's brutal power and the Harpies' insidious trap. A chaotic mess of splintered wood, broken masts, and tangled rigging, groaning with each wave. Reaching it is a challenge. The rocks leading to it are slick with seawater and algae. A failed acrobatics check could mean a nasty fall into the churning, frigid water, taking cold damage, risking getting slammed against the sharp stones, breaking concentration, even taking exhaustion. And those waves, don't just describe them, use them, time them. A big rogue wave could sweep across the wreck's deck, threatening to pull anyone not braced overboard or knock them prone at a bad moment. A really well-timed Harpy's luring song can pull them into the water where a rip can take them if they fail the strength saving throw. hitting them not only with cold damage and exhaustion, but separating them from the rest of the party. Think about how the environment can be used by the harpies to greatest effect. They are cunning creatures, and they should be used as such. Because the ship gives you the opportunity to give them more clues about precisely who they're facing and what their weaknesses are. That is the most valuable thing in a tactical encounter, is how the players can take down their enemy quickly and efficiently without worrying about the tactics that they will be using. If you are using the harpies' abilities and making them think strategically and cunningly, then you have to give your players the opportunity to do the same. The shipwreck is their opportunity to find out more about what the harpies' weaknesses are and how they can use their own strengths against the harpies' weaknesses to greatest effect. Now it becomes a game of knowing tactics and strategy, thinking things through, using not only the environment and their abilities, but also their combat abilities. So having come through the beach and braved the wreck, your players should now have a better idea of what the harpy threat actually entails. They've gathered clues, they've had a taste of the harpy's nasty opportunism, and investigating the wreck has given them more details on precisely what has happened to the shipwrecks, perhaps of the involvement of the Duke himself. And that could be where the quest ends. If all they're here for is information, then they can leave. But if they are feeling that they do need to take care of this particular problem while they are here, they can choose to scale the cliff face. And that is where things get really dangerous. There are 3 main caverns in the hillside. And the first is the Hoard, which is where they'll find some betrayal there for them. It's not the main nest, it's not yet. Think of this as a lower, easier to reach cave system. It's a side chamber which is reached by a shorter but still tricky climb up the cliff face onto this sort of ledge. And it is where the harpies stash their less organic, edible treasures. It's the shiny bits, the plundered cargo, the trinkets that catch their greedy eyes. It's here, amongst this sort of glittering junk, that we introduce a character who is designed to break your players' hearts and maybe their spirits. The luring song and the harpies' strengths is not in direct combat. It's about mislead and pulling them in directions that they shouldn't really go in. The Hoard is a trap for people who are here to defeat the harpies, and they will have introduced a method of encouraging the players into a more dangerous situation with someone who's going to betray them. So in the center of the Hoard is a maid. So let's set the scene. It's surprisingly large, but damp and echoing. The air is thick with a nasty mix, the sharp tang of brine and mildew, sure, but underneath is something else. A faintly sweet, almost floral smell, disgustingly mixed with the unmistakable stench of old blood and filth. Piles of glittery objects are heaped around, tarnished silver coins spilling from a rotten chest, a dented suit of fancy armor, too heavy for a harpy, but shiny. Gaudy jewelry stripped from victims, even a few minor magic items the harpies couldn't use, but kept anyway. And these treasures are jumbled with gnawed bones, scraps of rotting fabric, and other gross stuff. And then huddled in a dark, shadowed alcove, apparently terrified and weeping, is a figure. Let's call her Lyra. And depending on your hook, she could be a traumatized shipwreck survivor, a kidnapped villager, or even a previous adventurer. She might be loosely chained or just too scared to move. She'll see the party and her eyes will widen and she'll beg for rescue, her voice choked with sobs. And this, my fellow DM, is where the fun is. Lyra is, of course, a harpy. Not in her true form, not yet. Maybe she's a particularly cunning harpy with a natural talent for mimicry, or if you want to give your harpies a touch of dark magic, one that can take on a human-like appearance, a limited illusion or a crude polymorph. Or, for a less magical but just as nasty twist, Lyra could be a human cultist who's devoted to the harpies, or someone so broken by their songs that she now serves them willingly. Her mind is gone. She needs to be smart, manipulative, play the helpless victim perfectly. She'll offer them info, words tumbling out between fake sobs. Oh, thank the gods you found me. Those things, they keep their main nest higher up. A leader is a vicious matriarch. She has other prisoners. Oh, I saw them. Oh, help me. She wants to lure the players into the most dangerous part of the nest. And that means taking them from the treasure further in. Now, the important thing about the betrayal is you, as a DM, have to time where it happens for the greatest effect, because the Hoard is designed to be a distraction. Now, they will probably split up while it's fairly safe. they'll have a look around, they'll have a root around. They can either do that now or they will do that after they've defeated the main harpies. And that's your opportunity, really. If they start doing it now and they split up and there's a fair amount of space between them and there's an opportunity to lure one of them out to the cliff's edge, at the edge of the cave, then she's going to give him a push. You want to time it so that the betrayal will happen when people least expect it. She might try to warn the other harpies with a prearranged signal, an innocent bird call or a dropped piece of cloth. But most dangerously, she will wait for the most devastating moment to show her true colors. And it could be in the treasure room, or it's quite possibly when the party is halfway up a cliff, or in the most desperate battle at the end. It's ideally a long con. The more they trust her, the more they protect her, the more shocking her betrayal will be. So when DMing this cave, how you play her is super important. You've got to make her believable, and vulnerable, and sympathetic. If you want her to exist without having her actively hurt the other harpies, which could be interesting, but you still want the players to trust her, she could act as a healer. She could staunch wounds and help a little bit, adding some temporary hit points or something. Temporary hit points are a fun one because you could always have it that there's a condition towards the temporary hit points that she gives, a concentration perhaps that she can take away just as easily as she has given them. But the mechanics of it vary according to what kind of level of challenge you want to create this adventure, so I'm not going to prescript that for this particular dungeon. So Lyra is going to lead them from the treasure hoard further up the cliffs into the next cave after that. And this is less of an enclosed cavern, it's more open to the elements. It's got a slightly raked ceiling, but more importantly, is quite tall and has a lot of ledges around either sides. The perfect environment for a harpy to swoop in and out, even have ranged attacks from the top. They want to trap the players into a cave like fish in a barrel and then lure them off over the edge of the cliff as they can. Let the fall do most of the damage for them rather than engaging directly. And remember that the mechanics of the luring song are that once a player has thrown off that harpy's particular song, they are no longer susceptible to it for the next 24 hours. So you've got to think tactically about how that is, or even if it's higher level, just remove that restraint altogether, depending upon the quest that you're using. Think about how the harpies would then only have one harpy singing at a particular time. Stagger their use of the song so that it can be used to greatest effect. So building to the big finish now, DMs. The party has braved the lower, more treacherous parts of the cliff. They've dealt with environmental hazards. They've climbed the cliff. They've had their trust shattered, perhaps, and they're now pushing into the heart of the harpy territory. And this is where their specialized tactics, the verticality of the environment, the ticking time bomb of betrayal we planted, all come together to create a truly unforgettably hateful and therefore awesome experience for your players. So we get to the last of it, the nests, the open shelf. It's the highest, the most exposed cave. It's battered by the sea winds. It's reeking of generations of harpies. And this is where the harpy matriarch, the flock's leader, makes her final desperate stand, often surrounded by her last defenders or maybe even her screeching, vulnerable young. The cave mouth is fairly wide. It offers a higher view than they entered into, and that's important here. They might have climbed up 30 feet to get here, but now the drop is closer to 50 feet. For a low-level character, that drop is almost certain death. But for a higher character, while it might not kill them, that is certainly a fairly big problem, especially if they fall down and aren't able to fly back up. They would have to climb the 50 feet to get there. So here the harpies will fight with the ferocity of cornered animals. They'll use every dirty trick. They might try to trigger next collapses from above, bury the enemy in debris. If any captives were taken and are somehow still alive, the harpies might use them as crude hostages. Some might try a suicidal dive. They can grapple a player and drag them over the edge. Use the environment. Describe the sudden, powerful wind gusts through the cave mouth, possibly giving disadvantage on rangers' attacks, or forcing characters near the edge to make strength saves, or ruining concentration on spells. Note the crumbling ledges or the loose rocks that make footing uncertain. If the battle turns against the harpies, the leader, who is true to her nature, might try to flee, perhaps through the open top of the cave. Do the players let her go, or they press their advantage? And the treasure here might be the biggest haul, but will absolutely be disgusting to retrieve, buried under layers of filth and gore, possibly requiring a medicine check or even constitution saves to handle without getting sick. And so there you have it. The Stoop Bridge Cliffs, which is carefully transformed what might have been a generic monster into a multi-stage, story-driven nightmare that your players will be talking about and complaining about for a long, long time. So that's how we use the harpies to the greatest effect. They have an environment that works for them. The ability to fly cannot be underestimated as a strength in D&D, and that's why the harpies' physical attacks are so much lower. Their ability to lure players who aren't particularly concentrating on anything is fantastic. And if you want to make that harder, you can find some way to lower the average of their saves. You can give them, poisoning or exhaustion from climbing. You can make them use any reactions that they might have to boost their saves on other environmental effects. You can give them lair actions for the wind or the rain or the stones above. The harpies themselves are a fairly unintimidating stat block. It's how you use the lore and their abilities to make them much more interesting. So, now we have finished this map of the Stoopbridge Cliffs, and it is looking pretty good. As you can see, I have noted the various areas of the cliffs and used the denotation system of the chamber system that I've used in the Mega Dungeons video to talk about what kind of challenge that they present to the players in an attempt to maintain different kinds of encounters, choices, traps, and puzzles that will challenge them in different ways and give their different skills the ability to shine. Because remember, we do want to make them suffer a little bit because they will enjoy that. They are masochists. But we also want them to succeed in the end. We just don't want them to succeed easily. The challenge is the fun part. So thank you again for watching this episode of the Really Quick Maps. I hope that this has given you a new perspective on using the harpies. As before, I am going to continue the rest of this series, and I have a few of these videos prepared already as we're testing out this kind of concept. But if you have your own monster that you want me to be using, if you want to see how you can use an environment with a particular stat block to make it so much more challenging than it could be, just hit me up in the comments below. Have you used harpies in your own world to great effect? Did your players underestimate them and perhaps get a TPK? Let me know. I want to hear all about it in the comments. And as always, thank you to the community that I have around me. Thank you to my Patreon subscribers and to the YouTube members. It's fantastic to be able to continue to make these videos. As always, I want to hear about what you've been creating. Let me know in the Discord. You can join that in the link in the description below, and you can download an overview of the Stoopbridge Cliffs on the Red Quills Patreon. The link is also there. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you next week for our next adventure. I'll see you then.